want to reach the top? Do you want to stand out from the crowd? Do you want to be a success? I'll show you the 10 things you need to know to get to the top.
Hello and welcome to the Business Interview. I'm Markus Karlsson. You've just heard a clip there with our guest this week. She's known as Mrs. Moneypenny, and she's a businesswoman with many strings to her bow. She writes a weekly column for the Financial Times, doling out advice on everything from education to packing your weekend bag. And she frequently refers to her children as cost centers. She's also written a series of books, and the latest one is called Careers Advice for Ambitious Women. Our viewers in the UK may also recognise her as the host of the television show Super Scrimpers. Mrs. Moneypenny, welcome to the programme, and thanks for being with us from London.
You're very welcome, Marcus.
Now, I hope you won't be cross with me for revealing that your real name is Heather McGregor. Why then do you call yourself Mrs. Moneypenny?
Well, I started writing my column in the Financial Times in 1999, and at the time I was living and working in Japan, and I was working for a bank. And I thought that if I wrote under my real name, I would have been sacked. In fact, I would have been sacked. So the FT gave me a pseudonym, which was their way of trying to persuade me to write for them without jeopardising my employment.
Now, it is indeed quite an eye-catching pseudonym. I want to turn the conversation, though, onto women in leading executive roles. That's one of your interests, one of your specialities. You said that the famous glass ceiling doesn't exist. Why is that?
No,
That's quite
I
provocative.
believe that. Yeah, well, I mean, I promise you that's not the most provocative thing I've ever said. And the most provocative thing I have ever said in print, judging by the number of letters, complaints to the editor and general outrage, is when I said that I didn't believe that Pilates was a real exercise.
What about the glass ceiling then?
But the glass ceiling, I don't believe in the glass ceiling. I believe that we can smash the myth of the glass ceiling by smashing the myth that women can have it all. You know, life is about making choices. That's true for women and it's true for men.
Can men have it all these days? I mean, is it different for women and men?
I think the only difference is that women find it harder than men to say no. So, you know, I have 168 hours in my week and so do you. And so does, Francois Hollande, so does David Cameron. I mean, everybody has the same amount of time. How we spend it largely determines what we achieve. And if we don't say no to some things, and that can be tough. If you're a woman, it's very tough to say no to your friends, to your family, to your children, but you have to conserve your energy and focus if you want to get to the top.
How do you say no then in a nice way? I mean, I find that I have trouble saying no a lot of times. I agree to this, that and the other.
Well, the first important thing to say when you say no is no. You'll be amazed at how often people say no and they haven't actually employed the word no. And if you don't categorically say no, people will just ask you again. So you're just putting off the problem. So make sure you say no. And then if at all possible, make sure that you bring a solution, not a problem. So I'm quite often asked to speak or to do my stand-up comedy show for charity. And usually the answer is no. But if I say no, then I will normally offer them a signed book or something to auction, or or the suggestion of another speaker, or the suggestion of a website where they can get more information. I do try and say no and bring with it some added value.
So it's about softening the blow, if you will.
Yes, it is. It's about softening the blow. It's about making people feel that you haven't just said no and walked away from their request.
Now, Facebook's Chief Operating Officer, Sheryl Sandberg, she's just come out with her book on women in business. She says that women need to be more assertive, but she also has the message that women cannot really play by the same rules as men do in business. Would you agree with the latter?
Well, I think that women do need to play by the same rules, but they probably need to do a bit more as well. So they need to prove things that men don't often prove. I'll give you an example. You know, if you are an employer and you are interviewing a young man, say, I don't know, early 30s, and he's just got married, and he shares that information with you, you're still not going to think anything about whether you should employ him or not. If you are interviewing a woman who is in her early 30s and she's just got married, you know, the employer is probably sitting there going, I wonder how long this woman will be here before she has to take maternity leave. So my advice to men and women in that situation would be very different. If you are a woman in that position, I think you can't be asked that question. It's illegal under EU law. And so you need to actually answer the question for the employer.
Besides saying no...
Before they ask it.
Indeed.
Yeah, I think you have to say, look, I know what you're thinking. I'm 32. I've just got married. These are my career plans. I'm very determined to get to the top. I don't perceive this as a part-time job.
Now, besides saying no, and besides women also informing their prospective employer about what their plans are, what other advice do you have to women who want to make it in business? What's your key advice, so to speak?
Say no. I mean, my key advice is have a really good look at your 168 hours. How are you going? And by the way, that includes sleeping. So, have a look at how you're going to use it. Then I think everybody, men and women, but particularly women, need to draw up a list of their goals. So if your goal is to be the CEO of a major publicly quoted company, then, write that down. But if your goal is to raise wonderful, well-balanced children, and that's your number one goal in life, write that down. Just whatever is your goal, own your choices. And then the second thing to write down is your list of priorities. And then make sure that your list of priorities matches your list of goals.
Now, we're living in quite gloomy economic times, so I suppose it's fair to say that. Does that mean that business men and women need to adapt their behavior in any way to take the climate into account? Is the recipe for success different during boom and bust times?
I don't think there's any difference in the sexes between boom and bust. I think all the challenges that women face in climbing their career ladder are exactly the same in boom time as in quieter economic times. It's a matter of saying no. If you have limited resources, and we all have limited resources, then how are you going to allocate those resources, both in terms of the hours you have and in terms of the money that you have? So, it will take some tough decisions on your part if you want to achieve things in life, and that includes tough financial decisions. I mean, in the UK, as you mentioned earlier, I present a programme on television about how to live frugally. And astonishingly, we have regularly between 1.5 and 2 million viewers every week just in the UK. And this show is on its 4th primetime series and has also had 2 spin-off series. And that wouldn't have been remotely possible if it wasn't for the fact that the economic recession was continuing. So I think people are interested in how they can change their behaviour to achieve their objectives, whether that objective is a career or it's to live on less money.
Now, you're working in London a lot of the time. Europe's number one financial centre, of course. There's a lot of pressure for tighter regulation on the financial sector over in London. Do you feel that in the British capital at the moment?
Well, I think that the whole effort around bonus tax at the moment is the one thing that people are debating here very seriously. And you know that in terms of getting through Basel III and all the capital restrictions on banks, there has been a strong push to agree a limit on bonuses, which is 1 time salary, unless you go to a shareholder vote, in which case it'll be 2 times salary. And there are various other restrictions about long-term awards and so forth. But there's been a lot of debate about that, but not much debate about the fact this is only going to apply to companies that fall under the rules of Basel III on capital, on Tier 1 capital. And we've got an awful lot of financial services institutions in London, M&A boutiques, interdealer brokers, commodity trade, lots of people who don't take principal positions and don't need Tier 1 capital, and they aren't going to be constrained by that. So there has been a lot of legislation, and I'm sure there's a lot more coming, but people don't realise it doesn't apply to quite a lot of companies. And I don't think the brain drain is going to be from Europe to non-Europe. I think it's going to be from regulated to less regulated.
So do you think then that there is too much pressure on the financial sector, or at least on some segments of the financial sector?
I think there's a lot of effort to put pressure on the financial sector by people who need to be seen to do so by the people that elect them. So this is a political decision. This whole bonus tax, for instance, is entirely a politically motivated decision. It's not going to achieve anything because, as I said, there are plenty of non-regulated companies out there that can still offer multiple of people's income in terms of bonuses. So it's going to achieve very little. And despite that, it's going to cause some of the bigger banks, an enormous amount of work and paperwork and cost. So I don't see that very much has been achieved by all of this increased legislation.
Now, you're a former stockbroker and investment banker yourself. Would you still
Yes.
advise young people to go into those kind of jobs?
Well, I'm very old, first of all. I should tell you, I'm 50 years old.
Rubbish.
So when I was growing up, I was passionate about the capital markets. When I was a student, when I was a high school student, my economics teacher explained to me the inverse relationship between the rate of interest and the price of bonds. And ever since that moment, when I was about 17, I was passionate about wanting to go into financial services. And I think what's happened over the years is, as financial services salaries have risen and their starting level salaries have risen, so the starting level salary now for a graduate in a top flight investment bank in London in euros is about 50,000 euros. I mean, that's an enormous sum of money for somebody coming straight from university. And that has diverted a whole wave of talent over the last 10 years or so into the city. And I think what will happen now is that wave of talent will be now redirected to where it should be going, which is into the government, into other big companies that make things. I'd like to see talent spread across all those companies rather than being a drain into the city.
All right.
And I would encourage young people, even if they are passionate about financial services, go and get a qualification first. Go and get an accountancy or a legal qualification or something else before you go there.
You need to know what your objectives are. I suppose that's the main message from you by the sounds of it. Thank you very much indeed, Mrs. Moneypenny, Mrs. M. Heather. Thanks very much indeed for speaking to France 24.
You're welcome.
All right, and with that, we're going to wrap up this show. Don't forget that you can tweet me with any suggestions or comments. My Twitter handle, is Markus F24. Stay with us.